to our Sundays with the Librarian workshop. This workshop is fake news and real news, and my name is Bethany Odell. I am the virtual learning librarian and assistant professor at Emporia State. And I want to know, where do you get your news? So in the chat, this is a live session. So in the chat or in the comments below, if you're watching the recording of this later, I'd like you to share what you use to get your news or where you find your news now, because that's what we're going to be talking about for most of this workshop. So for most of us, we resort to using social media when we are getting our news sources. So we might use Instagram or Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Reddit, YouTube, or even TikTok, which is kind of an up in the air source right now, but I'm sure some of us got our news from TikTok anyways. And when we use social media, a lot of times we don't just use one, we might use multiple, because you might follow some organizations on Facebook, but you follow some of your favorite celebrities on Instagram to get, recommendations and reviews. So we might use multiple social medias when we're getting news sources. For me personally, I like to get most of my news on Facebook because I have used Facebook for, 5-6 years, and getting organizations that I like and a lot of like celebrities, I guess, that I follow for recommendations, things like that. And so I feel like I have customized my Facebook enough over the years that now when I log into Facebook, it's a lot of the news that I'm looking for. But over the years, I've also resorted to using Instagram. I really like using Instagram to get a lot of my news because of a lot of the places that I get news from do videos. And so then I can, go back onto YouTube if I want to watch the full news report, but for the most part, I just stick to those small clips on Instagram. I know that Twitter is pretty popular for most people in getting news, but I want to know in the comments, I want to know what kind of news that you read and where you get access to it. And if you're not using social media and you're using actual newspapers, or if you're using databases to get your news, share that as well, because I would like to know that. And I think everybody would like to know where everybody gets their news. So we're going to talk about what it takes to evaluating news sources to find good news versus bad news. So in this picture, I pulled a picture from Reddit, and Reddit might be a little old school now, but I think that it's still pretty well used by a lot of users. It's still there, so I think that somebody's using it, right? So here we have an image that I had found from Reddit, and what we're looking at this picture is, what is this picture telling us? And so as we're looking at this picture, I think when we find pictures like this on social media, like especially Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, we don't really think much about the actual content. Maybe when we see it, we might read it or look at it, and it might have like a 10-second effect on us. We might think, oh wow, that's a weird picture, or oh, that's interesting, and then we move on to the next thing or go about our day. But when we're actually evaluating resources, we actually need to stop and look at what is actually being presented. And so what we're going to do is a little bit of an exercise here where we're going to actually analyze this picture. And so what we're looking at in this image is, we see the title, Fukushima nuclear flowers. So if you're not familiar with any of those terms, like maybe you're not familiar with the term Fukushima, that would be completely understandable, because I didn't know what that was until I did a quick Google for what Fukushima was. And Fukushima is a location in Japan. There's actually a nuclear power plant in Fukushima, and it had a disaster a couple of years ago. There were no deaths that I could find reported, but there were a lot of accidents and injuries. So that kind of tells us a little bit of a background. So if you didn't know that, though, you probably say, okay, well, this is interesting. I don't know what this is, but okay. And then you look at the date and you might say, okay, this is from 2015. And so that might have an effect on you. I don't know. Sometimes dates, if they're more current, then you might think, oh, this is recent. This is current news. For this specific example, maybe not necessarily. Then we look at the author, and the author is right here. I didn't spell out the entire thing in my note there, but it's please Google Shaker Ammer, please Google David. That's kind of a pretty absurd username that we have going. But I think one of the things we need to remember is for most of us, when we're using social media sites like Instagram and Twitter, even TikTok, Tumblr, we don't usually have our original name. I think if you have your original name as your username, you are very lucky. I have multiple accounts for, like, I think I have like 3 Instagrams. I have ones for work too, but I have 3 Instagrams, a couple of Twitters. I have several Tumblrs. So, I can't remember what it was called. So I have several of those. So, when you have that many, you realize that you can't use your original name. And I don't think I have my original name for any of my social media platforms. So then you're looking at the actual content here. And so the content here at the bottom says, not much more to say. This is what happens when flowers get nuclear birth defects. That is the statement. That's the claim that is being presented with this image. And so as we're looking at this image, that might be what the impact is to us. We might think, wow, so this is what happens when flowers have nuclear birth defects. And then you all of a sudden think, oh, that's true. So then let's say later on, you're talking to your friends and somebody talks about flowers or mentions something like that. Then you might all of a sudden be like, oh, I saw this thing on, Reddit or Instagram or wherever you saw it. And then all of a sudden you're sharing this information before you've even evaluated it, because you're just sharing this picture and that this is what happens, almost as if it's true. And that's how fake news really spreads. It's not always done intentionally. Sometimes it's just accidentally, where you see something, you didn't stop and evaluate it, you just took it for what it was, and then you share it. And so that's where the danger comes in with fake news. So we're going to talk about how you would evaluate it, kind of just a quick evaluation process using this picture. So step one would be researching the facts. Is this dated information for a research topic? So when we think about dated current information, currency, we have to kind of keep in mind what our research topic is. So for this example, we have just a picture and we have the date 2015. That might not be anything. I mean, that would be an okay thing to say, oh, that's from 2015. Okay, done. But if you're doing a research paper, say you're doing something in the terms of nuclear power plant disasters, and you're using something from 2015, this would be an appropriate resource because you're doing your topic over the nuclear power plant disasters. And so that has a wide range of however many disasters are in history. But if you were doing maybe something along the terms of, for this topic, I can't really think of a good example of something dated. So let's go with a different example. If I was doing research on augmented reality, and we know augmented reality is constantly changing, the software itself is changing. I use a software called Blipbar, and I've seen it change almost completely to a new different platform over the last couple of years. So let's say I was doing research in augmented reality and I was talking about that source. If I was using 2015 as a resource, that would be dated, especially over augmented reality. I think that a good currency date for augmented reality would be probably the last 6 years to a year. So you have to think about it that way with your research topics, is what is a current date for your topics and when does it get dated? Then we're looking at, is this the original author? Because of the author seems so out there with this image, that kind of gives you that impression that maybe this isn't the original user. And because a lot of content on Reddit is what's been shared from other users, I think that that's a pretty good question to ask. Is this the original picture? Is this the original information? But in a lot of ways, if you're using social media, you're able to click on the user and go to their profile. So like YouTube is a great example. You can click on their little name at the bottom of their video and it will take you to their channel. And then a lot of channels have the about page that you can read up about that user. And a lot of people, if they want to maintain that credibility, they'll actually edit that about page to make it, here's who I am, here's what I do. When you don't see that, then that's usually when you got to question whether or not they take their channel seriously. I think most social media platforms are that way, where if you edit your about page, then you're obviously taking yourself seriously because you wanted other people to know your credibility. When you're not, and you're not trying to confirm that credibility, it makes it really hard for people to take your channel seriously. And then finally, what claims are being made about the topic? And we already talked about the claims that this claim about nuclear birth defects is linked with the picture. And so in some ways, and we're going to talk about how this example works specifically with this, but in some ways we have a claim and a picture that don't actually belong together. Or maybe the picture is true. Maybe this picture is actually a picture of nuclear birth defects, but maybe the claim that's going with it don't match. And in a lot of ways, we call that clickbait. We see that on YouTube a lot, especially with the channel art that we see before we start the video. That's kind of what drew us to that, where there might be emojis or like a specific position that the person is in to make you want to watch that video based on the channel art. So maybe that channel art doesn't have anything to do with the content of their video, and that happens a lot, and we call that clickbait. So that would be where you see these may or may not belong together. So then step 2 is, what are others saying about this topic? We call this scholarship as conversation, where you're looking at what other people are saying to kind of gauge where the topic might be accurate or inaccurate. And I had to do a Bing search instead of a Google search. I had to do a Bing search, and I used this as a screenshot because when I was doing this search with my Google on my device, my filter bubbles were really affecting my search so that I wasn't giving a very great search, because they were showing how this specific image is used in education. And so if you're not familiar with filter bubbles, I encourage you to go out and just do a quick Google search. In fact, there is a TED Talk video that talks about filter bubbling. I think there's only one, so if you just do filter bubbling and TED Talk as your keywords, you'll probably see the one I'm talking about, your very first result there. But filter bubbling is fascinating, and it really is where the internet has decided it's going to customize its search results to you specifically as the user. And so it's like tracking your history and your searching and your keywords. And so over time, it's going to customize your search results to what you have looked for in the past. So for me, because if I do a lot of research with .edu and .gov sites, a lot of times when I do my research, I get a lot of those in my results. Or even a lot of the newspapers that I read and the news articles that I do go out and search for, those show up on my first page a lot more often than they would if I just did a random incognito search. So I did one here as an example to just kind of show what results probably would look like for someone who didn't really have filter bubbling affecting their search terms. And that was a little bit of a longer explanation for that, but filter bubbling fascinates me. So I hope it fascinates you to look it up. So here we are. Here's some of our results when we're looking at this page, and this is the first page of results. So we have this international news mirror, we have the Weather Channel, and then we have the Smithsonian. And I wanted to kind of look at these individually to show kind of the thought process of if you were looking up to see what other people were saying about this specific resource. So we have this picture of the flowers, and we click on this mirror because it would be very appropriate to assume that because Fukushima is a international location, then an international news might be a good resource. With this one, we have, here's our title, here is our author, and here's our date. And what we notice about, it's kind of taken a while to load, so I'm trying to drag this out a little, let all the ads load here. Don't you love the internet? So here we have the date, and you'll notice that this date is a day after the original post that I found on Reddit. So that would kind of tell me that this is a current trend, that this is currently being talked about in the news, and so it might be in other social media platforms. So as I'm reading this, I kind of get a little bit more information about Fukushima nuclear plant, that it had a power station have a meltdown in 2011. that's in Japan. So that gives us kind of that additional information. But then we get this information right here about this Twitter user that kind of tells us that this might be the original source compared to this other user. So this other user obviously has uploaded this image to Reddit and is sharing it as almost their own content with no linking to the original source, which is another big problem that we see on social media, is people using other people's content and not giving them credit where credit is due. But in another workshop that we have coming up, we'll actually talk about plagiarism and copyright. So I think that it's appropriate to just kind of skip over and let you guys wait for that workshop and get excited about that, because that's always interesting information. So we can go ahead and cross off the international news and say, okay, we've learned that there's a different author out there to help confirm the credibility of this image. The second one we have is the Weather Channel. And it amazes me how often the Weather Channel comes up in search results for research. And my little tidbit about the Weather Channel is the only thing the Weather Channel is good for is telling you the weather, if you want to consider that to even be good too. But it's the Weather Channel. It's supposed to be reporting on weather. And so I find that a lot of articles that it does report on don't typically fall in the truth factor anywhere. A lot of cases, I think that there's more Weather Channel articles that are fake news than not, or you really have to focus on it, like evaluating that article. So I like to just cross off the Weather Channel as just don't even bother. But I'm not saying that it's a bad source. It's just really, you got to think about what it's saying to you. And again, we get this username and this tweet, so that kind of tells us a little bit more. It's very similar to the Mirror, talks about the accident that happened, Fukushima, and it even talks about it being in Japan. So it's kind of helping confirm those facts that we had originally from the first article. And then we have the Smithsonian. And if you're familiar with the Smithsonian, I'm familiar with the Smithsonian because I love Bones, the TV show, and that's where Bones works, is the Smithsonian. But there's also Smithsonian Magazine is it's a pretty good resource. It's one that you should still evaluate, but it's for the most part pretty good. So as far as accuracy goes, here we have a different image, which makes this interesting because then we have to question whether the picture that we have here actually matches the content of the claim about nuclear birth defects. And so that's where we start asking, what is this? This article definitely has a different perspective. So they're still talking about the same Twitter user, which helps make confirm that, who is the original author. So now I feel very confident in that. And again, it's talking about the same location, the nuclear power plant in Japan. And it's actually saying down after the earthquake in 2011. So it's even giving additional content about what happened there. So then you have the original image here. So it's even pulling the original tweet and then additional content as well. So there's 3 different resources that are all from different authors. This one is, here's the author here. Here's the date. Again, it's the same kind of date, but it's after the one that I found on Reddit. So you're seeing that they're all a conversation about the same topic, but from different points of view and different people. So going back. So then finally you want to try and find the original source. And so we found the original source. And what I really like about this specific example is for probably the majority of us, this English is my first and only language. And so reading this doesn't make any sense to me. So it's almost easier for me to go and read whatever this claim is, but there's no really good way for me as the researcher to know if this is the same claim. So, I could probably go find someone to translate it, but I think the easy way to understand this is there are a lot of times when we do research where we're not going to always understand the content. Maybe it's in a different language, but I think for a lot of us, when we're starting a new research project and we're learning about a new topic, we don't know anything. We don't know the main terminology or jargon that's being used. And so that's where we have to do additional research using other sources to help us gain this background to understand certain research articles. So for this one, that just tells me that maybe focusing on using those news articles that I found previously might be just as good of research for this picture. So I think that this is a good example because it helps us almost feel more confident when we're doing research and we're finding things and don't understand what it's saying. Don't give up. Just feel, just know that you have to continue to just kind of dig a little deeper. And so you're not the only one that has that problem. Everybody has a problem when it comes to research. So using this example, I feel like it makes it more obvious that clearly I, as an English speaker only, am not able to interpret this. So I would have to do additional research. So then the last thing that you want to do is look for citations. And in this example, there's not really any citations to go with it. Those news articles were basically pointing to this specific source, an author, but there's no, citation or journal or peer review or anything that's going along with this kind of claim. So for this example, my research would be done. My evaluation process would be done. But for other ones, like if you're using sources like Wikipedia is great to use when you're looking for sources because, most of the claims that are in Wikipedia, almost every other sentence has that little number that links to the source citations at the bottom of that page. So if you're going down and you're clicking and using those sources, sometimes that can really help your research because they're using news articles, journal articles, books, videos, all kinds of different types of sources to help back up their claims. So I like Wikipedia for that reason. I like that Wikipedia really shows that it doesn't just matter about one type of source, but when you're doing research, you should look at all types of source types, books, videos, news articles, but also looking at more than just one source. And so that's what we've done here is kind of that little bit of digging around and finding multiple sources. So I want to talk about resources that you can use that help you fact check. So using credible sources, especially when it comes to news sources like NPR, NPR is not typically very biased. I think there's a lot of other news sources out there that are biased. A lot of news is just biased because of, somebody's writing it, a journalist is writing it, and that's just how that source type works, is it's biased information. But with NPR, I feel like they're not quite as biased as most. So you can get a pretty good both sides of the story. That's not to say that they aren't biased, because I've definitely seen articles, especially with political articles, that can be biased, but I feel a little bit more confident in using that one for information, especially as the elections are coming up. Then you have the New York Times, and the New York Times are very similar to NPR because they have a reputation of being a good newspaper. So they're not going to be as likely to be sharing fake news. I think that they're very cautious about fact checking their information before publishing it. Doesn't mean that always happens, but it definitely is something that they really focus on doing because they have that reputation of being a really good newspaper. Now, I can't say that for a lot of other newspapers, especially local ones. I think a lot of times the local newspapers really jump the gun, try to get the information out there because they're small press and they're trying to, get their name. They're trying to get people to continue to see them as relevant. And I think sometimes that gets in the way of fact checking, but they can be great resources too. It just really depends on, in some ways, who's writing the articles. So that's how I often do. There's journalists out there that I specifically follow on my Facebook so that I don't even have to bother looking at their newspaper. I just follow and see what they report on the news. So the New York Times is actually a resource that you have available at Emporia State. It's free, and so you just create an account, and you have to create an account every year, but if you have an account, it's almost just like logging in and re-verifying that you have an account. So that's a resource that you have that I would love for you to use. One of the nice things about the New York Times is also there's a mobile app. And I use mine on a mobile app, so it doesn't take up very much space on your phone. So if you're thinking, oh, I have no space left on my phone, you know, you probably could find a couple apps that you never use that you could delete and replace with the New York Times, so that you're getting good quality news in your feed. So then finally there's Snoops, and I really like Snoops. I think a lot of people are familiar with it, but we'll share it anyways just so everyone's familiar. And this is a great fact checking website, where that's basically what they do is they take whatever people are talking about and they decide what's current, or what's true and what's fake about that topic. So I do have the Fukushima. I kind of forgot how to spell it. Again, that shows it's a term that I'm not as familiar with. And if I just do a little search here, you'll see that there's a couple of search options here, but this one right here, which is in the same timeline as the Reddit post and those news articles. So that kind of tells us that this also is contributing to that conversation. And here's the picture. And then down here at the bottom, it kind of tells me what is true. So a photograph shows a group of mutated daisies in Japan, and what's false. And the flowers in the photograph are proven to be mutated due to the radiation from the power plant. So that's false. So when we're looking at the picture, it's kind of both true and false. And so I think that probably, since I was using it as an example, most people are probably assuming that it was completely fake news, and there's actually some truth to it. So I think that's where we have to be careful and know that sometimes claims don't always match up with the pictures. So then going down here more, it actually talks about the power plant itself, kind of summarizing what a lot of those news articles were saying too. It talks about this Twitter user, so this is the original author, and I love that this actually has the translation, and so it's actually saying what this is. And what you'll notice is that this is not the same statement as what is being posted in that Reddit statement. So I think that's a pretty good find right here, is finding that translation itself too. So then it has other examples of mutated flowers and kind of going into explaining how that works. And so Snoops is really good about really digging deep into that topic and finding information. When it comes to the elections, I mean, you'll kind of see here in the sidebar that there's even examples. With elections, there's so much fake news. I mean, people are being paid to publish fake news articles about politicians and the elections that it makes it really hard to actually find good quality information about the elections. So that's where you should use sites like Snoops so that you can find out what is actually true and what's false. So if I just do a basic search for like Trump, and here's something that is current, maybe in the last couple of days, and here's the statement, and then here is the rating, and here's the evidence. And this is kind of funny. I have no opinion here. I just think it's funny. So that's how you would be able to confirm any of your news. So we'll just kind of do another one here. Did Trump say wildfires are caused by exploding trees? Here's more information about it. I can get a little lost on this website because there are some things that you think are like completely fake and they're true, or vice versa. And so I think it's just kind of a fun site to be on in general. So that would be one that I would just search all the time if it were me. Going back. So there's also library databases, and really you can consider any library database to be a credible resource that can give you good information for fact checking on any type of research topic. But the ones that are going to be really helpful for your news sources would be Nexus Uni. Nexus Uni is current events, current newspapers. It also has case studies, information about laws, those kind of resources. Then you have government documents, and Emporia State is classified as a government repository. So our entire third deck, which is right off of the second floor, is all government documents. So if you're ever curious about where we keep all of that, the print, and then we have a really large digital government repository too. Then there's opposing viewpoints and context, issues and controversies, and CQ researcher. I like to group all three of those together. They are very similar in a lot of ways, even though the resources they have are very different. In some cases, the types of sources that they have are different. So each package has its own different types of information. But I think they all three work in the same way when it comes to sharing topics, current topics, and information about current topics. Like issues and controversies will give you pro-con about a research topic. CQ researcher kind of does that too. Opposing viewpoints it's really large, and so it can give you points of view from the academic point of view. It can give you newspapers, videos, interviews. So I like to think of all three of those as great resources to use if you're doing any kind of research that includes a current event or some kind of news kind of topic. And then we finally have Kansas News Bank, and Kansas News Bank is where you'll find our local newspapers like the Emporia Gazette, the Kansas City Star, the Wichita Eagle, and that's where you would access those. So there's so many more, and I just mean there's so many more as in really we have 190 databases that we pay for, and most of them would be great resources for any kind of fact checking on a research topic. So finally, I want to get into the claim where you shouldn't judge a source by its image or title. We kind of talked about the whole clickbait, and that sometimes you might look at something and think, oh, that's completely absurd. That's not true. There's no way that could be true. And so I want to kind of show how sometimes we think that and it actually is true. So in this case, sometimes real news may sound fake, such as the US government has a zombie apocalypse plan. That might sound completely absurd, but what we do find, we did our little bit of evaluation process. We did a kind of Google searching here, and we're seeing that there are several topics out there. There's a Wikipedia page, there's a news source, there's videos on this conversation, and the videos come from the History Channel and from Wall Street Journal and this infographic show. So there's a lot being talked about on this topic, but then we start doing that digging around and confirming those keywords, like, we start seeing this con plan 8888 being used. And so I looked up, what is this con plan 8888? And that's the original document, the original source for this zombie apocalypse plan. And here it would be, all the information about that. And so then to help confirm this, I went into the CDC zombie blog, and we were pretty familiar with CDC now that the coronavirus has been around, but that's the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And so when we're looking at the CDC, that's a pretty reliable website. I think that for some of us that might be a little up in the air as far as a true statement with the coronavirus, but for the most part, they are a government site. We know that because .gov. So we'd like to think that mostly the CDC is a credible source. So for this, the zombie preparedness, there's a blog. They have their blog right here, which has their date and their author, and you can click into the author and see what makes this person a credible source. So it kind of tells us a little bit about this person, his research. It tells us when it was recently updated, and we have to be really careful about that when we use any kind of web sources to make sure that it is updated, because a lot of times content can get outdated basically because nobody's going through and revising the content. I do like this, that there's actually a zombie preparedness graphic novel that the CDC has put together. So if you're interested and you're wanting something to do over the weekend, here's an excellent graphic novel, and that kind of helps talk about that preparedness plan. So here we have pretty much evidence that this statement is, that even though it sounds completely fake, is actually true. So that's where we have to remember that sometimes real news may sound completely absurd, and it's not. So my tips for you that I want to leave you with today are, don't believe everything you read or see, and question everything. So I like to approach pretty much any news article that I see or any news claim, especially with the elections coming up. I like to approach it as in it's fake before I can prove that it's true. So that way that I don't just believe it and don't just go out and share all of this information only to find out later that I just shared a bunch of fake news, and it was completely by accident. I just happened to see it and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I just shared it. So now I would just like to say thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be in the chat so that you can continue to ask questions, but you can also leave some comments below and we'll follow up later. If you wanted to email me separately, then here is my email. And I would just like to ask that you take a minute or two to take our quick survey to tell us what you think about our workshop so far. And if there's other topics that you would like us to do workshops for research, citations, or anything like that from the library.